Welcome to Shift, the college admissions ACT, SAT, and CLT podcast for a changing world. I'm Cassandra with Achievable, and if you're a parent trying to help your student prepare for the ACT, SAT, or CLT without the stress, the sales pressure, or the four-figure price tag, Achievable was built for you. Our courses help students study smarter, stay motivated, and actually retain what they learn, all in a flexible format that fits real family schedules. You can try Achievable free at achievable.me, and if it's a good fit, use the code podcast for 10% off. Now, let's get started. Today, we have Nat Crawford with us, and Nat, I'd love if you could introduce yourself.
So my name is Nat Crawford. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Chicago and my graduate work in the PhD program at Stanford University. And for the last 20 years or so, I've been working with Improve Your English tutoring services in Silicon Valley, helping students with English preparation, test prep, and college admissions. And I've also started a new service, Elite STEM Coach, which is specifically focused on helping elite STEM students apply to top STEM programs in the United States. And it's a real pleasure to be here on the podcast again, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much for joining. And today we are talking about college admissions and the use of AI, and
Mhm.
specifically in writing essays, college admissions essays. And so to kick things off, I wanted to ask, what are colleges saying about essay writing in the age of AI? And we'll get more into maybe how they're handling it, how they're going to be handling it. It's this precarious situation at the moment because it's both been this ongoing thing. It is still fairly new. It's also advancing very quickly. So, what would you say colleges are saying about this right now as far as the essays?
Colleges have said some specific things about the use of AI in college admission essays. So we'll start with Yale. If you look at the Yale admissions podcast, so Yale has a long-running podcast about college admissions, and they did have a section on AI writing. And the two admissions officers who run the podcast, they said that first of all, they consider AI writing, and this is Yale's official statement as well, that it considers the use of AI to write application essays as academic dishonesty, and evidence of that will be treated as academic dishonesty when evaluating students' college applications, right? So there's Yale's official stance on it. And then in the podcast, the two people who run the podcast said they've tried to write prompts to have AI write a good college admissions essay by Yale standards. And bear in mind that these are people who have read thousands of admissions essays, and they've every year they select students who have written some of the very best ones. And so they have a good sense of what a good admissions essay looks like. And they said that they were unable to write prompts that were able to produce an admissions essay of the quality that they were looking for when students apply to Yale looking for a chance of admission. So their recommendation was don't use AI at all. It's just going to interfere with the process of really digging deep inside yourself in order to find a strong creative topic, an introspective topic that tells us something about who you really are. So the recommendation from Yale is that you shouldn't use AI at all. And if you do, you're really not going to help yourself with your Yale application. So that's Yale. Princeton said something very similar. They had a dean who said, we don't recommend using AI because it's going to lead to a lack of authenticity. So it's interesting that Yale emphasized a lack of creativity and Princeton emphasized a lack of authenticity. So they said, and this makes a lot of sense, of course, because AI, it's trained on terabytes upon terabytes of data, all of which is going to outweigh the individual aspects of a person who's using it. And so you're going to lose those little bits and pieces if you use AI to write an application to a school like Princeton. You're going to lose those little quirks and so forth that make individual student writing what it is and make for really authentic student writing. So Princeton, the admissions officer in this case did not say anything about having tested AI writing, but just said that she does not think that AI writing is going to lead to authentic essays. And clearly that's going to be a mark against you if you apply to a school like Princeton. Now, it's quite interesting to compare the responses of these two Ivy League schools with the response of Georgia Tech. So I help California students with their applications to Georgia Tech because it's a state school, but it's got a top 10 program in computer science and other engineering programs. So it's a very strong school for engineering measured nationwide. And Georgia Tech has a very different take on AI, probably related to the fact that it's got a strong engineering program. And so what Georgia Tech says is they think it's fine to use AI for brainstorming and for considering ideas, like typing, hey, what if I write about this? What do you think about this? And getting feedback on that idea. But they don't want to see students replacing the act of writing with AI. And so Georgia Tech, it understands how researchers, especially in the sciences, use AI. They like nowadays, if you're working in the sciences, AI tools like ChatGPT and Google Gemini are really strong tools for doing research, for getting up to speed, for answering far out there technical questions that might require more time to figure out. So it's a really good tool for that. But of course, these professional researchers are always very careful to separate the research aspect of AI from the actual idea generation aspect of the work that they do. So that for them, AI is very much a tool and not a crutch that they are using to support themselves. And Georgia Tech basically tells its applicants, you feel free to use AI in the same way that our researchers are using AI when it comes to writing your college application essays. Now, I do have some thoughts about this. So I think this is, of course, if students only ever used AI in this way, then there would be nothing wrong with using it. In the same way that if they only ever used the internet to find information, but wrote their ideas for an essay entirely on their own, then there would be no problem with going online in order to do research. Now, the reality of the matter is, though, that students are under an incredible amount of pressure in a lot of ways. And AI-based writing offers them an opportunity to alleviate that pressure. They've got the pressure of feeling like they just don't have ideas and they don't know how they're going to come up with one. And so they think about turning to AI in order to help out with that. They've also got just the pressure of writing these essays, right? One of the big challenges of applying to college is that there's an incredible amount of writing work to do. It's almost like having an additional AP class in English when it comes to the amount of writing that you do. And so there's going to be a strong temptation in students, I think, to use AI to assist this process, especially if some students have a lot of difficulty planning into the future and they get hung up with completing their homework assignments in the fall of senior year. And then all of a sudden, they've got 3 admissions essays due in 3 days, and they don't know how they're going to get them done. And again, it can be very tempting to turn to AI in order to do this work. And with Georgia Tech's guidance, there's always the risk of it becoming a slippery slope so that a student can say, okay, it's like trying to stop yourself from eating cookies, right? I'll have this one cookie and then I'll stop. And then after that cookie, 10 minutes later, man, I'm still hungry. I want more cookie, right? And then more cookies. And then the only thing that stops you is the empty box. And then you think, I'll do better next time. With AI writing, a student could very easily say, okay, I'll just use AI to come up with ideas, the way Georgia Tech says. And then they come up with the idea, wow, that was great. That was a much better idea than I could have come up with on my own. Okay, let me just ask it how to organize this idea. I'll have it create an outline for me. And then I'll write the essay on my own. And so they have it create the outline, but then some other work intervenes and they don't actually write the essay, and then it's the day before the essay's due, and oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm going to do. I want to make sure I tell my parents that I completed my application and sent it in. I'm just going to use AI to write the essay, and then I'll make some changes to make it to personalize it instead of making it AI. And here you start running into a real risk, right? Because AI detection tools continue to get more sophisticated, right? Everyone talks about how AI writing is becoming more sophisticated and saying things like at some point we might not even be able to distinguish between AI writing and human writing. But the flip side of that is that AI detection tools become more sophisticated as well. So that, as good as the AI is at making something seem human, there are certain attributes that it consistently has that make it sound like AI. So you could, for instance, conceivably have a situation where a student uses AI to write a first draft of an essay and then modifies it in such a way that it beats the AI checker. But then 1 month later, the AI checker has become more sophisticated because technology is always more
Mhm.
sophisticated. And the essay that the student submitted gets caught by the AI checker, even though his first, even though when he submitted it, the AI checker couldn't catch it. So that's one of the risks that students are running is that eventually, like what they're doing gets caught. One thing, for instance, that I noticed, I worked with a number of students with their applications in the fall. I had students who were definitely using AI, and I used an AI checker to call them on it. And there's a pretty straightforward way for breaking out of solving that problem with a student's essay to make sure that the essay no longer sounds like it's been written by AI. But it basically involves forcing the student to sit there and write while you watch. Here, okay, here's an outline of a rough outline of what you wrote that got flagged for AI. Now you write it out for me right now. And this works. Like if you run that essay through an AI checker, it will show up as human generated. So I've been through this with students, and I know that students are really tempted to use AI out of a combination of pressure and insecurity, but they're really putting themselves at risk by doing it for their applications. One of the things that this touches on another matter, which is are AI generated essays going to slip through whatever guardrails universities have created, and eventually will AI generated essays be part of a winning application for a student? The folks on the Yale podcast said almost certainly that's going to happen at some point in the future. But if students get in because having written an AI essay or having used it on part of the essay, it's going to be because there's a lot of other stuff on their application that is absolutely stellar. Like an essay is not the only part of an application. There's also, of course, the grades, the test scores, the teacher recommendations, which is a whole nother topic that's really important these days, and and the interview too. Students might like eventually use AI and manage to get into a school, but that doesn't mean that the AI essay is what's getting them in. They could be getting in spite of the essay, much the same way that a recruited athlete, for instance, does not need to write as high quality an essay in order to be admitted to a school as a student who's not a recruited athlete. So with AI in college admissions, so I started out by talking about what schools are saying. We focused then a bit more on Georgia Tech and what Georgia Tech says. That opens a new set of challenges for students to face that they need to resist. And in the end, even though some AI essays are going to get through the go past the guardrails and be admitted, students really are better off making sure that they're adopting a wholly human approach to writing their college application essays.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And you mentioned having these proctored essays as well. And I think that's something that has come up again and again when it comes to college admissions. How feasible do you think that is, especially with the tens of thousands of applications that one school may get, and you have admissions officers? How are they going to distribute that? It could be similar to having a camera on, and then there's nuances to that as well. So, can you walk through what that might look like, or if that's something that could be implemented?
Yeah, I think absolutely it could be implemented. One of the interesting questions I've laid out what schools are saying about AI essays, but of course we're still at the first stage of this development, and it could be that schools will conclude we can't really police the use of AI on an admissions essay. We need to find other ways of evaluating student writing ability. And one way to do that is, of course, by having proctored admissions essays. Now, there is a bit of a history here because the on the SAT in the version that was used before this one, so the version that was used, I guess, back in like the 2010s, there that did start off with an essay that students had to write. And so there you had a proctored essay, and the idea behind this was that students would have to write an essay, it would get evaluated, and then college admissions committees would have an actual piece of student writing written under proctored conditions that they could conceivably test against the student's college application essay if they had questions about the student's writing ability. Now, what's interesting about this is that one college in particular, Yale, eventually said, we're no longer even going to consider the essay component of the SAT. And so you might wonder, why did Yale say this? Clearly, it's because Yale was doing some research on admitted students and found that there was zero correlation between a strong score on the SAT proctored essay and writing ability when it came to writing for Yale courses. And so Yale concluded that this was just something that was not worth including. And this sent a message to the College Board that whatever the College Board had in mind when they included this essay component, it wasn't working out. And eventually, for the last 2 years of that version of the SAT, the College Board did not even administer the essay. They just decided that it was not worth the difficulty and expense of doing so. Now, the SAT is taken by, I think, 1.8 million students across the United States. And so that's a lot of essays to process. But if we're talking about proctored essays and making sure that the essay was written by the student who's writing it, there are better tools nowadays for proctoring those using cameras, of course, and that are attached to the computer. And their Duolingo, for instance, has done a good job of connecting identity verification to the tests that it has students do for English ability. So the technology for verifying student identity is much better now than it was. And in addition, if we're talking about measuring the writing ability of students who are applying to top colleges, that's a much smaller number of students than 1.8 million. Okay. So there are only 33 colleges in the United States that admit fewer than 10% of applicants. And so you would, if you really wanted to evaluate the writing ability, the live writing ability, which might be considered the real writing ability of the students who are applying to those 33 schools, or maybe applying to the top 50 schools, you might only need to evaluate 150,000 to 200,000 students. So about 10% of the number that the College Board was evaluating with the SAT. So this is definitely, I think, something that's feasible for colleges to do. And for that matter, they could include another component, like maybe there would be some live questions that the student needs to respond to just by speaking in order to get a sense for how students handle questions off the cuff. So technologically, at least to me, this seems like something that's quite feasible. And colleges might decide that it's something that they need to do in order to really tell who the good writers are. Colleges, by the way, already have ways of trying to do that right now. For instance, Princeton. If you apply to Princeton, then Princeton says you need to submit a recently written graded essay with the teacher's comments on it. So ideally, this is something like an essay that you've printed out and submitted, and the teacher has handwritten comments on it. And Princeton will include this as part of the consideration for your application. So this gives them a way of telling, first of all, just how good your writing is. And second of all, how rigorous your high school English class was. Like if the teacher's comments are discerning and sophisticated and clearly show a high level of expectation for writing and thinking, then that means that the A that you got in that English class is pretty valuable compared to the A that someone might have gotten in a class where there wasn't the same level of high expectation for writing. So that's one way that one particular college is evaluating the quality of the writing of the students who apply. Now, apart from those two ways, requiring students to submit an essay and also like maybe having them write in a lockdown browser. The other method is teacher recommendations, but that's a whole nother topic that I think I'll talk about separately. But clearly, a strong teacher recommendation from an English teacher is another way of determining whether the writing that a student produces for a college application essay is on par with the kind of writing that the student regularly produced in English class. And it's just so people know your English teacher's recommendation, whether you're applying in the humanities or in STEM, is a really important component of your application to top schools, including MIT, including Caltech. So it's not just the traditional Ivy League schools, but also the top technical schools that expect strong writing skills from students.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm curious then, you talk about teacher recommendations being really important. I've heard standardized testing is being more emphasized as well. Do you think that with the age of AI, that essays would ever just completely go away?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. Historically, the essays, they've been around for about 60 years or so, 60 or 70 years. So that was something that was introduced in the 60s, the college admission essay, when Ivy League schools wanted to democratize access to their education. So they thought, how are we going to tell who the people are who have the qualities that we're looking for? We'll have them write a personal essay, and kids who can write a thoughtful and interesting personal essay will be the ones who are strong candidates for our schools. And now, of course, like the writing of the college admission essay has become this whole huge industry and also a rite of passage for students who are applying to top schools. But one could easily imagine a scenario in which these essays are no longer considered, and instead we have more sophisticated ways of gauging how well students write in real time, in combination maybe with more extensive interviews with top candidates, and also a closer look at teacher recommendations and the general quality of the writing that students do in school. There's one other possibility here, which is going to sound perhaps really crazy and dystopian, but that possibility is just randomizing admissions so that you split students into a number of categories and you just say, all right, we're going to have X number of students. We're going to have X number of students from California in this socioeconomic background. Here's the list of students in that category. Randomly select the ones who are going to get in. And that could lead, of course, to odd situations, like you end up admitting 8 fantastic clarinet players when you only need 1 clarinet player, or you have no viola players in the orchestra just because things happened at random. But I'm sure there would be ways of modifying it in order to make sure that a college got all of the kinds of students that it needs. But that's one radical approach to top school admissions. This whole question of merit, we have this assumption that schools really are evaluating students based on merit, but like you have to remember that every year there are like fantastic students who for one reason or another don't get admitted to their dream school. And it's not because they lack merit, it's because certain aspects of the admissions process worked against them. So there's no shortage of students who have a great deal of merit when it comes to the intellectual and the personal qualities that they bring to a school. And colleges might end up just dropping the whole facade of we admit the the students with the most merit and just saying there's a lot of students with the merit to attend this school. We're just going to include them at random. And then college will become, as it is at this point, it's the sorting ground for higher education, right? So if a student, for instance, wants to go on and apply to a degree program like a master's or a PhD program at a top school, then doing well at a college, you can do well at a state school and still go to a top 10 master's or a top 10 PhD program. You don't have to go to an Ivy League school in order to go to an excellent grad school. So if college admissions ends up being randomized, again, don't quote me on this. Don't say this is my recommendation. But if it ends up happening, there's still a way for students to enter professions based on merit once they graduate from college. Like, college will be the place where students take the really challenging classes, where all the kids who are getting A's in the English class or A's in the math class really get sorted out into A, B, C, and D in the challenging college classes. And colleges end up identifying the students who are the best and brightest when it comes to specific fields where we need the best and brightest, like engineering, medicine, and so forth.
Yeah, that is such an interesting take. And it really feels Wild West in a way. It's just very, unprecedented, really. And AI has really done that not only with, it's done it with everything, right? It's done it with the workplace and with education. And it's just really interesting how to see the changes unfold as we continue moving forward and advancing. But there's another question I had, which has to do with you had mentioned teachers that have higher levels of expectations.
Mhm.
And how does that affect the equity in students who maybe don't have access to those types of classes or those types of teachers? You also have other students who have parents who are hiring private tutors for them, who are helping
Mhm.
them not only with their grades and their exams, but also their essay writing. Can you talk a little bit about the differences there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is a really important point when it comes to the use of AI writing in college applications, which is that colleges, AI detectors will tell you, okay, we think this has a 60% chance of being AI generated and or an 80% chance of being AI generated. And then they'll highlight the parts that seem particularly AI. Okay. A college admissions committee, if we come back to the Georgia Tech example, where Georgia Tech is saying, go ahead and use AI for the process of setting up your essay, but just make sure you write it yourself. So let's suppose that a college admissions committee, that the AI detector detects a certain amount of AI use in the essay. Colleges are likely going to look at this differently depending on the background of the student. Like for the last 20, 30 years or school, students with a lot of money have been hiring essay coaches in order to help them with the college essay writing process. And a good essay coach can be really helpful. An essay coach can help students avoid the common pitfalls that come with writing a college essay because like every human being is basically the same worldwide. And so a lot of kids have the same basic instincts when it comes to what they want to write on the college essay. And because those instincts are shared by so many other people, they're often a mistake, right? A college essay coach can certainly help students avoid making those common mistakes, right? And of course, college essay coaches can help with things like encouraging students to write with more vivid detail, to come up with more figurative language, to really be authentic in their writing and so forth. But it's important to remember, of course, that those tools are only available to wealthy students, and colleges are well aware of this. But colleges have not historically wholesale removed students from consideration just because they are wealthy students who are probably getting help from someone else with their essays. One of the reasons is that there's also a blurry line between the kinds of help that students get. For instance, a wealthy family whose parents do not speak English as a native language. Is it wrong for them to get a native speaker to help with their daughter's college application? What about a middle class family where the parents are both professors at a university? Is a school going to look at that application and say, I think the parents were probably reviewing this for like typos or other problems with content and so forth. So we're not going to admit that student. That's not typically a decision that colleges make. So kids can get essay help from a wide variety of places. But if you're considering kids who are generally in the lower socioeconomic brackets, those are kids who, like the parents, probably did not attend college, or maybe they went to trade school or something like that. And they're probably going to schools where the education of the teachers is okay, but not exceptional. And teachers can't help with things like the college essays. So these are kids who traditionally are not able to hire college essay coaches in order to help them out. And what if they start using AI in order to get assistance with the college essay writing part? I think that if people are on an admissions committee and they see that a student from a lower socioeconomic background has some evidence of AI in his writing, they're probably going to conclude something along the lines of, if we had a privilege detector for essay writing that works the same way as an AI detector, a lot of our wealthy students would either fail the privilege detector or show evidence of privilege in their essays. So this student does not have access to that level of essay help. He is using AI to give himself a leg up. We don't really feel that we should punish that if the rest of the application is looking strong. Now, it's important, of course, that the rest of the application looks strong. So he'd still need to have teachers who said, hey, this was a great student in class, both in the way that he talked with other kids and also in the work that he did with me. He would need to have strong grades and strong test scores as well. And if there was an interview process, he would need to do well in the interview too. So they'd look at the other parts of the application and say, does this look like a student who is strong intellectually, who's going to bring a unique perspective to our school, and who's really capable of using AI assistance the way it's supposed to be used, as opposed to just having it wholesale write his essays for him? They'll probably overlook something like AI use. But if it's a wealthy student, then unfortunately the presumption is going to be something along the lines of, this is a student who's had all sorts of advantages, been to the top schools, has a really strong English teacher, is surrounded by other strong writers who would presumably push him to write well himself. And then we see evidence of AI in his essay. It just seems like he's not using his educational background in the right way. Instead, he's turning to AI to do the work for him. So I could very well see admissions committees reacting differently to students reacting differently to the use of AI in admissions essays, depending on the background of the student who shows use of AI in the essay. And that's something I think it's going to be a real interesting problem for admissions committees to consider, basically, and they'll have to be considering it. I'm sure they have been considering it to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like that's a good segue into how are they gonna try and implement any of these possibilities in order to evaluate these essays, these applications, but also do it fairly and making sure that everyone's getting the same review. What do you think, like, what direction do you think that most colleges are going to go? We already saw, like you mentioned, most colleges are like absolutely no AI. You have Georgia Tech, there's some wiggle room there, but like you said, that's a slippery slope. So, how do you think that they are going to, I don't know, try and implement some of these policies in order to lessen the amount of AI, but also is that realistic?
That's the big question here. And I honestly don't know. I think I don't know exactly how it's going to work out. I think there are certain things that you do need to bear in mind with colleges, which is that they have fundamental goals for the kind of student body that they want. And they will sometimes change the ways that they reach those goals, but fundamentally those goals are baked into the process. Okay. One of the things to think about is why was MIT the first school to require SAT scores after COVID? So, like during COVID, all the colleges jumped on a bandwagon saying we're not going to require SAT scores. Then MIT was the first school to say we're going to require SAT scores. So why was this? It was because MIT couldn't get the kind of students that it wanted without requiring SAT scores. So they tried having a no SAT score requirement. They did their best job of evaluating students. And what they presumably found was that they didn't get the same quality of students that they were getting when they used SAT scores. Also, interestingly enough, MIT said that without SAT scores, they were actually less equitable because it was harder to find those superstar students who were growing up in less privileged areas. With SAT scores, if you have a kid in a small town in Idaho who scores 800 on the math section and maybe 750 plus on the reading section, assuming his parents are not professors at a local university, this is like a real diamond in the rough, right? It's a kid who's just got an incredible amount of ability, but he's not in the sort of place that recognizes it. And MIT loves to find students like that. But they weren't finding them. It was a lot harder for them to find them without the SAT scores. They went back to requiring SAT scores, and presumably they're much happier with the nature of the students that they get. A school like Harvard is going to have different goals. So Harvard is still, whatever the Supreme Court decision ends up to be about how Harvard is supposed to handle its admissions, Harvard still has a certain kind of student body that it wants, and it's going to use whatever means it can get in order to get that student body. And I think that as far as AI writing goes, I don't know exactly how it's going to work out, but I do know that many aspects of the preparation for getting into a top college are going to remain the same. Colleges are still going to want students who can write well. They're going to want students with strong teacher recommendations. They're going to want students who volunteer in their communities. They're going to want students who are leaders. It could be that the application essay will no longer be a way of evaluating which kinds of students Harvard wants to get, but they'll find other ways of doing it. And the students won't need to change. It's just that the way the students are evaluated is going to change. But all those aspects that I just mentioned, they have remained fundamentally the same since the 60s. This is what top colleges have been looking for a long time in their students, and they simply continue to modify their way of getting those kinds of students.
Yeah, exactly. And it is, even with COVID, having to roll with the punches, I feel like it's a similar situation with AI, and they're going to find a way to navigate. And it is going to be different, per institution, because like you said, they are looking for different qualities in their students. But then I guess, is there anything that we missed that you want to make sure we touch on?
I think for today, that probably covers most of my current thoughts on the matter. As you said, this is an evolving area right now, and it will be interesting to see how colleges respond. I hope I've suggested a few of the ways that they might respond, and we'll just have to see what they end up deciding.
Yeah, bit of a waiting game.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Thank you so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Cassandra from Achievable with Nat Crawford. And you can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT, SAT, and CLT courses at achievable.me and use the code podcast for 10% off.